and welcome to episode 2 of the Whiskey Jug. I'm your host Schwa, and today we're going to be talking about my favorite Irish whiskey. Now, in episode 1 we talked about where the term whiskey originated from, and that is the old Gaelic term Uisciaba, and from there it became Uisciaba, and from there became whiskey, and which, the old Gaelic term means water of life, which to me there's no better description for this delicious beverage. Now, when you're talking about Irish whiskey, it is broken down into 4 main categories. The first and the most common that you're going to come across is blended, and that's things like some of your Bushmills, Jameson, Michael Collins, Tullamore Dew, and any of the Middleton varieties are typically going to be blended. Next up, you have a pure pot still, which is very unique to Ireland itself. Now, pure pot still are made from 100% barley, and they're made in the big copper traditional pot stills that, if you look on the logo of Bushmills, you'll see what they look like, and that's they're made in those, and they're 100% barley, and they're a mix of malted and unmalted barley. And when they use the green unmalted barley, it's going to add a little bit more spice to it, so you'll get a lot of different flavors based on the mixture of barley in making the whiskey. And then next you have the single malt whiskey, which some of your, like the Bushmills 21, Bushmills 10, some of the more premium whiskeys, they're going to be more the single malt variety. And then I don't have an example of them, but the other is the single grain whiskey. Those are a little bit more rare, and typically you don't see them except for in a little bit bigger cities that can have more import and export and stuff like that traffic, so they can actually get some of those more rare whiskeys in there. Now, another thing about Irish whiskey is that of the big 4 of the American whiskey, Canadian whiskey, Scotch, and Irish whiskey, Irish is by far the most rare because they only have 4 distilleries that supply the whiskey for the entire world, and of those 4, only 3 are currently active. You've got the old Bushmills, you've got the new Middleton, you've got the Cooley, and then the recently opened Kilbeggan distillery. Now, Kilbeggan was opened by Cooley in 2007, and Irish law states that you can't bottle whiskey unless it's been aged for a minimum of 3 years. So you won't be seeing anything coming from the Kilbeggan site until late 2010, early 2011 at the earliest. Now, a couple of years back, all Irish whiskey was actually owned by the Pernod Ricard Company, and they owned at the time the old Bushmills and the new Middleton distilleries. Then in the 80s the Cooley distillery opened, and in the 90s sometime the Pernod Ricard Company, which was the Irish distillers, they tried to take over the Cooley, and then the Irish government stepped aside and said, no, in the spirit of fair competition, you can't do that because then you have a monopoly on it. And so then in the 90s, the Pernod Ricard Company then sold off Bushmills to the Diageo Company. And so if you look on the back of Bushmills, you'll see this nice little Diageo logo, which Diageo also happens to own our good friend Johnny Walker. So then from there, back in later on in 2007, Cooley opened up a second site, Kilbeggan. And Kilbeggan is the site of a historic museum for distillation, and so they opened that up and they turned it from being a museum into a working still, and so we'll be seeing some whiskeys from them come out. Now, one of the things to note is the various types of whiskey. They also have some color variances between them, but you have your blends, which are typically a little bit lighter. You have your pot stills, which are going to be a little bit darker, and then you've got your malts, which as they age are going to get darker, and we're going to take a look at those right now. Okay, now what we have here are the 3 main whiskeys we just talked about. We've got right here is a blend. You can see how much lighter it is when compared to the others. Here we have a pot still, and you can see it's a bit darker. And then here we have a single malt, which is kind of right between the 2, but it's a young single malt. That's Bushmills 10. And then right here we have Bushmills 21, which
as you can see, is obviously a whole lot darker than the others. And that's because it's had a longer time to sit in the oak casks, which has also given it a much more rich flavor, and it's also mellowed it out a bit.
So that about covers it for Irish whiskey. If you have any of your comments you'd like to add or tales about your favorite Irish whiskey, go ahead and put them below in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you. So until episode 3, cheers.